When everyone finished breakfast and were just about to set off, Aoyang suddenly walked over with his donkey and told everyone to wait for a short while. He then yelled, "Come out!" The young mountain lord of Go Table Mountain, who was even more beautiful than a woman, quickly rose up from the earth. He was wearing an ethereal white robe with large flowing sleeves, and he held a long wooden box in his hands as he bent down and said to Aoyang with an obsequious smile, "Great immortal, this underling has already prepared some mounts for you and your companions. I guarantee that your journey will be smooth sailing for the next 100 kilometers. It'll be like a stroll in the park." Aoyang was like a completely different person from yesterday, the one who had easily subdued his enemies with a bamboo saber. There was a warm smile on his face as he replied, "Thank you for your hard work. Could you please hold on to those things for a while as well? You can give it to me when we're about to leave Go Table Mountain." The young mountain lord felt extremely flattered, and he said, "You're far too kind, great immortal. You're going to reduce my fortune when..." Aoyang walked over and patted the young deity on the shoulder. He then handed the white donkey leash to him and said, "Then I won't hold back. Bring this donkey and that horse to the border as well." "It's my pleasure," the young mountain lord said in a righteous manner. "It's my honor to be able to help you." Aoyang turned around to look at Li Huai. The two of them had fought over a piece of spiced beef during breakfast just then, and the young boy had cried, screamed, and threatened suicide, stooping as low as he could to achieve his aim. Not only did he offer his mom and his sister to Aoyang, but if Aoyang were willing to take him up on his offer, perhaps Li Huai would have even offered his dad to him. Of course, Aoyang didn't show any mercy, and in the end, Li Huai could only bare his teeth and swing his arms as he tried to fight a decisive battle with Aoyang. Even now, the two of them were still locked in a tense and hostile situation that might break into a battle at any moment. Aoyang raised a thumb and pointed at the obsequious young mountain lord behind him as if to say, "Do you see, little brat? Lord Aoyang is someone who's respected and revered in the cultivation world. Remember to show some respect in the future." Li Huai rolled his eyes before turning around to spit on the ground. Aoyang huffed and said, "Let's go, let's go." A brief moment later, 3 forest turtles whose shells were as large as dining tables climbed up the mountain one after another. Their shells were as bright red as roaring flames. When the young mountain lord, who was holding a bamboo cane in his hand, peered at them, the 3 forest turtles immediately shrunk into their shells a little. This was a case of one thing subduing another. As the nominal ruler of Go Table Mountain, the young mountain lord was unable to dispose of the 2 pythons even after several hundred years. This was because of the restriction on his cultivation. However, the remaining beasts and birds were like nothing more than the sheep and chickens that the common people bred. Each turtle could hold 3 passengers, and the young mountain lord had thoughtfully nailed some low rails on the edges of the turtles' shells. These could be used as handrails, and they were made from strong lengths of wood that he had harvested from the mountain. All this was in order to prevent his esteemed guests from falling off their mounts. Li Baoping, Li Huai, and Lin Shui all climbed onto the turtle shells. Li Baoping called Chen Ping'an onto the forest turtle that she had chosen, while Aoyang sat on another with Li Huai and Lin Shui. Meanwhile, Zhu He and Zhu Lu were able to enjoy the remaining forest turtle to themselves. Li Huai was absolutely delighted. When the forest turtles started to move, he only swayed back and forth slightly, and there wasn't any sign of turbulence. This was surprisingly far more comfortable than horse-drawn carriages. Even though the forest turtles looked clumsy, they were actually fairly quick. Li Huai hammered Aoyang's knee in excitement, and he exclaimed, "Holy Mother! This is the first time I've ridden a large turtle like this. Aoyang, you're a mean and wicked person, but you've finally done something good." Aoyang looked at Li Huai with pity in his eyes, and he said, "How were you able to grow to this age? By the looks of it, the small town is truly a simple and modest place." Li Huai turned around to Lin Shui and asked, "Is Aoyang saying bad things about me?" Lin Shui was resting with his eyes closed at this moment, and it was as if he were silently comprehending the gentle spring breeze that was brushing past him. He completely ignored Li Huai's questions. There was a devious expression on Li Huai's face as he turned back to Aoyang and attempted to decipher some clues from his face. Aoyang's expression was stern as he told the young boy, "I was saying something good about you." Li Huai glanced at the green bamboo swords resting across Aoyang's legs before glancing at the small silver gourd hanging by his waist. Aoyang, won't you let me play with the bamboo saber? He asked. Aoyang shook his head and replied, You're not suited to using a bamboo saber. Li Huai frowned and asked, Then what weapon is suitable for me? There was a serious expression on Aoyang's face as he replied, You can speak reason with others. You can subdue others through reason and virtue. Li Huai sighed and lamented in dejection. But I can't. Why's that? Aoyang asked in curiosity. He had only been messing around with the young boy. Li Huai gazed up at the lush green scenery in the distance, where he would occasionally see the blur of a spring flower in full bloom. My voice is too soft, and mother said that whoever's louder in a fight is whoever has reason, he said quietly. However, father doesn't like to speak, and even a whack to the head won't draw a single peep from him. My sister is also a soft and mellow person who doesn't speak very much. So if something happens when mother isn't around, my father and sister will only be able to look at each other helplessly. It's a really worrying sight. In fact, I don't like to argue with others either. However, when I'm sitting on the fence and watching mother ferociously argue with others, sometimes I get worried about the day when mother grows too old to argue. What will we do then? My family is so poor that we can't even afford to fix the hole in our roof. Father isn't capable, and when my sister grows older, she's sure to marry and go somewhere else. At that time, what will we do if there's no one to argue and fight for us? Won't we be bullied to death by other people? Lin Shui's mind wavered a little. Aoyang clicked his tongue in wonder and commented in an amused voice. A little pipsqueak like you is thinking so far into the future? I don't have a choice though, Li Huai said in exasperation. Mother said that I'm the only person in the family who has balls. Mr. Qi also taught us that those who don't plan for the future will be certain to face immediate trouble. So I have to provide for whatever it was. A rainy day too, Aoyang said with a smile, helping him finish the idiom. Li Huai shook his head and asked, Lin Shui, what did Mr. Qi say about virtuous people? Lin Shui opened his eyes and recited slowly, Virtuous people conceal their talents and only display them when the situation does call. Li Huai pointed at Aoyang and judged. Aoyang, you're trying to show off with only a half cup full of knowledge. Lin Shui felt the urge to move to the forest turtle that Chan Ping'an and Li Baoping were sitting on. At the very least, he wouldn't have to listen to this nonsense anymore. Aoyang untied his gourd and took a swig of wine from it, chuckling. I already came to an agreement with Go Table Mountain's mountain lord yesterday. As compensation, he and those two beasts will give us a farewell gift when we leave. Did you see the long wooden box just then? Those in the cultivation world refer to it as a horizontal treasure pagoda, and it works in the same mysterious ways as the upright 100 treasure shelves. It's filled with valuable treasures, and I initially wanted to give you all a treasure each. You were naturally no exception. Now, however, you can say goodbye to your treasure. Li Huai was unfazed, and he simply said with a stern expression, Aoyang, I know that your belly can fit 100 large boats. Aoyang faltered and asked, What nonsense are you spewing? Lin Shui interjected in a seemingly casual manner. The belly of a prime minister is large enough to hold a boat. 3. Aoyang laughed heartily as he whacked Li Huai across the head. The forest turtles took tranquil mountain paths as they traversed mountains and crossed rivers. Their movements were gentle and relaxed, and this allowed their passengers to also feel carefree and leisurely. When they passed scenic areas, Aoyang would tell them to rest for a while to enjoy the views. When they passed a small and lush green bamboo forest, Chan Ping'an picked up his broken machete and felled 2 stalks of bamboo. He then chopped them into varying lengths and placed them inside his bamboo basket. Li Huai knew the reason for this, and he couldn't help but jump up and down in excitement. I'm about to get a bookcase, he hollered again and again. The 3 forest turtles were resting in the distance, and when they saw Chan Ping'an hack down the 2 stalks of bamboo, their beady yellow eyes that were as large as fists were filled with admiration. Aoyang was drinking nearby, and as he looked at the adept motions of the busy young boy, he smiled and remarked, Quite skillful judgment. However, it's a shame that you still can't enjoy any good fortune. Before setting off, Li Baoping asked Zhu He if she and Zhu Lu could sit on a turtle by themselves. Zhu He naturally didn't reject her request. However, he reminded his daughter to take good care of the young mistress, to which Zhu Lu replied with a nod. Zhu He walked over to sit on the same turtle as Chan Ping'an. Meanwhile, Chen Ping'an split the emerald green bamboo tubes into strips. However, he didn't have any hemp rope on him, so the earliest that this bookcase could take shape would be when they arrived at Red Candle Town. Zhuhou picked up a strip of bamboo, and he discovered that it was extremely light yet also incredibly tough at the same time. This reminded him of the green bamboo cane that Go Table Mountain's mountain lord held. He instantly came to a realization. The 1 or 2 mu of bamboo forest just then was definitely no ordinary bamboo forest. Perhaps it was even one of the areas where the spiritual energy of Go Table Mountain gathered. Zhuhou genuinely adored the young mistress, and he couldn't help but tell Chen Ping'an, "This bamboo is quite extraordinary, and if you used an ordinary machete on them, the blade would have chipped or bent a long time ago. When you finish making these 2 bookcases, perhaps the young mistress will feel slightly gloomy, because in the end, it's actually her small bookcase that's the most ordinary." Chen Ping'an was astounded. He turned to the forest turtle that Aoyang and the others were sitting on, and he asked uncertainly, "Is that bamboo forest related to Go Table Mountain's mountain lord?" Aoyang nodded and replied, "It's an area that holds much of his wealth. The bamboo forest draws spiritual energy from the mountain, and it takes 100 years for the stalks of bamboo to become this emerald green. Only after another 500 years is it possible for the stalks of bamboo to potentially accumulate a sliver of greenwood essence. However, it shouldn't really matter. The 2 stalks of bamboo that you chopped down were only around 200 years old, so that mountain lord won't be overly aggrieved by it. At most he'll only feel pain for a little while. He won't be affected at all." Chen Ping'an sighed and abandoned his thoughts of returning to harvest more bamboo. "What's wrong? You feel like 2 stalks is too few? Do you want me to pick some higher quality ones for you?" Aoyang asked. Chen Ping'an shook his head and replied, "No, it's fine. It should take less than an hour to go there and come back. It's not a hassle at all," Zhuhou commented. Chen Ping'an looked at the bamboo basket beside his feet. It was filled with bamboo strips, yet there was still a lot of empty space that could fit more. However, he still shook his head and said, "It's more important to keep moving forward." Zhuhou didn't think much about this, and he said with a smile, "When practicing martial arts, tempering oneself is of great importance. If one doesn't spar with others, it will be impossible for them to reach great heights. So when we have spare time, why don't we spar with each other? However, let me say this first. Even though I call it sparring, I can only guarantee that I won't injure you. Apart from that, I definitely won't go easy on you. So mentally prepare yourself to get beaten up." Chen Ping'an was delighted, and he said with a beaming smile, "Uncle Zhu, hit me as hard as you can." Noon was yet to arrive, but the forest turtles had already made it halfway out of the mountains. They stopped by a pool under a waterfall, and they all busied themselves with their assigned roles, creating a small fireplace and cooking lunch. During this time, Chen Ping'an walked over to secretly tell Li Baoping about the situation regarding the bookcases. After hearing his explanation, a wide smile appeared on the little girl's face. In the end, she was filled with pride as she patted the small bookcase that never left her side and announced, "The best bookcase in the world is right here. In fact, I've even given it a name, Green Robe." After lunch, Aoyang called Chen Ping'an over to the deep pool. The waterfall wasn't large, so the chilly air that emanated from it wasn't intense either. The 2 of them walked side by side. After hesitating for a moment, Aoyang asked, "According to what you said before, you now own 5 mountains in Dragon Spring County? Downtrodden Mountain, Treasured Scripture Mountain, Rainbow Cloud Mountain, Immortal Herb Mountain, and True Jewel Mountain." Chen Ping'an nodded with a puzzled expression. He didn't hide anything from Aoyang, and he said slowly, "Downtrodden Mountain is the most valuable mountain, and Treasured Scripture Mountain is also fairly valuable. However, the 3 remaining mountains are fairly ordinary, especially True Jewel Mountain. It's nothing more than an unremarkable hill." Aoyang lightly patted the hilt of his saber as he pondered for a brief moment. The true value of these mountains lies in the fact that they hold far more spiritual energy than the outside world. Not only were the 5 monsters that we encountered trying to follow the Iron Talisman River and enter your hometown, but there are actually many spirits and beasts who have only just gained sentience rushing toward your hometown as well. However, it's up to their fate and abilities to see who's fortunate enough to ultimately obtain a plot of land there." Aoyang took a sip of wine before continuing. Don't feel like a thief has entered your house when these spirits and beasts enter your mountains. It's just like the situation in Go Table Mountain. Why did the Mountain Lord allow those 2 pythons to slowly grow stronger under his watch? The reason for this is simple. After the Mountain Lord was stripped of his title as an official god, Go Table Mountain needed others to stand up for it if it wanted to retain any spiritual energy. It needs others to guard the mountain, suppress the yin energy, and also draw in good fortune. Aoyang, are you saying that I should invite the Mountain Lord of Go Table Mountain or the 2 pythons to my mountains? So it's sort of like, they're guarding my property? Chen Ping'an asked. Aoyang bent down and casually picked up a pebble. He tossed it into the pool and shook his head with a smile, saying, "You're only half correct. Assigning new official gods of mountains and rivers is a critical task for the Greatly Empire in the near future. This pertains to the fortune of the empire, and they definitely won't allow others to get involved. In terms of which mountains in your hometown will enjoy the presence of a mountain god recognized by the official court, the emperor will definitely assign some dead people to them, more accurately heroic spirits. It doesn't make sense for the Mountain Lord of Go Table Mountain to reside on your mountains. In any case, even if your downtrodden mountain or treasured scripture mountain is fortunate enough to host a mountain god decreed by the imperial court, allowing temples to be built, statues to be erected, and incense to be offered, the Mountain Lord in this area won't be able to become the mountain god of your mountains unless he passes the strict examination of the Ministry of Astronomy. Otherwise, he'll only be able to stay in Go Table Mountain. But maybe he still has a small ray of hope. After all, he's been here for hundreds of years, so he should be given some credit for hard work if not for merit. It's not like he's created any great trouble either. Perhaps the Emperor of the Greatly Empire will show benevolence toward him and conveniently promote him to a mountain god, while upgrading the status of Go Table Mountain. So, he won't agree to your request even if you go and ask him. To these deities, their status as gods who can enjoy offerings and incense is absolutely critical. After all, there's no turning back once they make a commitment. Chen Ping'an squatted down next to Aoyang and asked tentatively, "Then should I invite the 2 pythons?" Aoyang continued to toss pebbles into the pool as he smiled and replied, "It is hard to decide. Even though the 2 beasts are quite powerful, they've committed quite a number of sins these years. If word of this gets out, it'll be a stain on your reputation. If I allow them to go to Downtrodden Mountain or Treasured Scripture Mountain, can I guarantee that they won't eat anyone?" Chen Ping'an asked. Aoyang faltered when he heard this question. He rubbed his chin and replied, "Eat people? With such an abundance of spiritual energy, these beasts will usually be completely focused on cultivation. However, these pythons are part of the flood dragon family, after all, so they're innately cold-blooded creatures. It won't be surprising if they taste test a few humans out of boredom. For example, if a woodsman is unlucky enough to encounter these pythons while they're out hunting for food, it's genuinely hard to say what will become of him." Chen Ping'an followed up with yet another question asking, "Then can I tell them beforehand that they're not allowed to eat people if they cultivate on my mountains? Is this possible, Aoyang? Aren't you afraid that they'll agree now but go back on their words after entering your mountains?" The man wearing the bamboo hat retorted. "Aren't you afraid that they'll swallow a person with each gulp? After all, you won't be returning to your mountains anytime soon." Chen Ping'an was in buoyant spirits as he explained slowly, "Aoyang, didn't you say that there's a postal station at Red Candle Town? Postal stations are able to deliver letters, so I can write a letter to Master Ruan and loan Treasured Scripture Mountain and the 2 other mountains to him for an additional 50 years. If Master Ruan feels like that's not enough, I can add another 50 years to the offer. In return, I'll ask him to keep an eye on the 2 beasts for me. If they dare to injure anyone, he can just kill them with a single punch. This is better than leaving them in Go Table Mountain where they can continue to harm others." Of course, I was only mentioning the worst-case scenario just then. At that time, I'll let the black python that's got the potential to become a flood dragon stay in Downtrodden Mountain. Can help me accumulate wealth there. Aoyang, you also said before that if a python successfully evolves into a flood dragon, the place where they evolve will imperceptibly become a place of great fortune. Is that correct? In fact, I can even be a bit more shameless and ask Master Ruan to allow it to stay in Treasured Scripture Mountain. Just think about it. If the white python is lucky enough to evolve into a flood dragon as well, Then won't I make an even bigger profit? I've been worried the entire time after buying these mountains, so I'll at least feel like I've done something with them if I let the 2 pythons live in them. It'll feel like I'm making bucketfuls of copper coins every day. I can almost hear the clinking of the coins. Aoyang was slightly dazed as he looked at the passionately talking Chen Ping'an. He didn't know whether to laugh or to cry. In the end, he asked with complicated emotions, "Chen Ping'an, do you really like making money this much?" Chen Ping'an was stunned and he retorted, "Is there anyone in the world who doesn't like making money?" Aoyang fixed his bamboo hat, not wanting to speak anymore. Otherwise, his words would simply fall on deaf ears. He sighed and said with a smile, "I initially thought that you would reject this offer." "Why's that?" Chen Ping'an asked in confusion. Aoyang cupped some water in his hands to wash his face. He then turned around and chuckled. "For example, I thought you would say that you would rather kill the 2 beasts rather than take them in. Even though you're poor, your Chan clan is extremely righteous, so how could you possibly allow them to enter your mountains?" And so on and so forth with a ton of reasoning. I was already prepared to listen to your lecture. Chen Ping'an's expression calmed down, and he picked up a pebble and lightly tossed it into the pool. After falling silent for a moment, he suddenly turned around and patted Aoyang's shoulder, saying, "Aoyang, you're still too young and naive." Aoyang raised a brow and remarked in amusement, "Oh? It looks like you're in quite a good mood. You're even able to crack a joke." Chen Ping'an copied his expression, also raising a brow. He surprisingly gave off a slightly mischievous feel as well. Aoyang roared with laughter as he stood up. Chen Ping'an also stood up. However, he suddenly thought of something and he asked anxiously, "Aoyang, the most important thing is, will those 2 pythons be willing to move their burrows?" Aoyang chuckled and didn't reply. However, Chen Ping'an could see his hand resting on the hilt of his saber. Aoyang patted his saber and joked, "See, you also need to hurry up and practice martial arts and fist techniques. In the future, you can then start to practice swordsmanship. Otherwise, you might be willing to reason with others, but what will you do when others aren't willing to reason with you? You'll have to use this." Chen Ping'an didn't offer a comment on this. The 2 of them returned to where everyone else was, and Aoyang asked in curiosity, "Why didn't you collect some more bamboo just then? There won't be another opportunity after we leave this place. In the future, you won't be able to buy them even if you offer a high price. Someone told me before that people need to be content with what they have. They also need to understand when to call it a day." Chen Ping'an replied casually, "You genuinely believe that nonsense?" Aoyang asked, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Chen Ping'an placed his hands behind his head. This was a rare moment of relaxation for him, and his head swayed like the stalks of slender bamboo in the gentle breeze. "It's because I've never heard of any grand principles in my life. So after finally hearing a phrase or two, I won't be able to forget them even if I want to," Chen Ping'an replied softly. Standing in the distance, Zhuhou suddenly shouted, "Chen Ping'an, should we find some empty space to spar?" "Sure thing," Chen Ping'an replied as he sprinted over. Once bamboo started growing together, they could easily grow into a sea-like forest as long as they didn't encounter any natural disasters or man-made calamities. However, the small and hidden bamboo forest in Go Table Mountain had grown extremely slowly for the past hundreds or thousands of years. Even after being cared for by generation after generation of mountain lords, it still showed no signs of expanding into a larger bamboo forest. At this moment, the handsome young mountain lord of Go Table Mountain was squatting next to the 2 severed bamboo stumps. He stabbed his green bamboo cane into the earth next to him, and it was as if he wanted to cry as he sobbed in an aggrieved and quivering voice, "How can you bully me like this? No matter how esteemed a guest you are, you're still just a guest. Since when could a guest bully their host like this? To shatter the protective formation with a single slice and expose this treasured bamboo forest. Is this any different from stripping the daughter of your host naked simply because they're slender and beautiful? Is there any difference? Any at all?" The 2 pythons that were born from the soil essence and cloud roots collected by immortals were coiled up in the outer fringes of the bamboo forest. Their eyes were cold and menacing, and there was a hint of pleasure in them at this moment. They were taking pleasure in the mountain lord's misfortune. A voice sounded nearby, teasing, "Then it seems like you have far too many daughters. You'll definitely go broke trying to pay for their dowries in the future." The young mountain lord immediately stood up in fright, wiping the grief and anger from his face. He bowed at Aoyang and apologized. "I'm sorry for making a fool of myself in front of you, great immortal. This underling is accustomed to the impoverished life in this small place, so please forgive me for having a narrow outlook on things. I can't compare to you, someone who's traveled all over the world and seen the myriad mountains and rivers with their own eyes. With your skills and knowledge, I'm sure you can tell just how important this bamboo forest is to me. This miserably small plot of land is genuinely the majority of my wealth. Even though that young boy only took 2 stalks of bamboo, that's still enough to make me feel uncontrollable sadness and grief. These are natural emotions, are they not? Please forgive me, great immortal. Please forgive my unintentional provocation." After leaving and returning, Aoyang was now leaning sideways on an emerald green stalk of bamboo. He looked at its lush leaves before retracting his gaze and asking, "Was the ancestor of this bamboo forest obtained from the bamboo sea small world? And you carved it into this green cane? Because you offended a certain immortal, they removed your golden statue in anger." The young mountain lord was genuinely stunned when he heard this. The obsequious expression on his face didn't grow, and it instead showed signs of disappearing. He imperceptibly straightened his back before bowing properly and saying, "I'm Weibo, the mountain lord of Go Table Mountain. I was bestowed the title of mountain god by the final emperor of the divine water nation, and I was responsible for the thousands of kilometers of land around Go Table Mountain. The dynasties changed afterward, and the Greatly Empire rose and conquered the divine water nation. I did something that angered the founding emperor of the empire, and I was thus demoted from a mountain god to a mountain lord. The land under my control also decreased by 150 kilometers in radius, and to this day, I'm still regarded as a criminal." He raised the green bamboo cane that was brimming with spiritual energy and said with a bitter smile, "Fortune never comes in pairs, and calamity never comes alone. I was forced to chop bamboo in the bamboo sea small world, and this is where I carved this trekking cane. However, this unexpectedly angered an immortal friend of the bamboo forest's owner, and as he smiled, he pushed me back into the earth that I had come from." As he leaned on the bamboo, Aoyang adjusted his stance into one that he felt was more carefree and dashing. He clicked his tongue in wonder and remarked, "Sounds quite pitiful." The young mountain lord appeared slightly sheepish. Ignoring the pitiful mountain lord for the moment, Aoyang turned around to look at someplace next to the bamboo forest. In his vision, he could see Chan Ping'an, who had returned with him, standing on a small hill. The pythons smartly kept their distance, and this was especially the case with the white python, which still felt deep apprehension in its mind. Its eyes were extremely alert. Aoyang smiled and said, "My friend wants to do some business with you. You two can decide on a price, and if the deal succeeds, then we'll be friends in the future. If the deal doesn't succeed, however, there are still other moral and righteous ways to handle the situation." As he said this, Aoyang smiled and placed his hand on the hilt of his saber. Aoyang retracted his gaze from the 2 pythons and asked in slight curiosity, "Those 2 beasts aren't genuine descendants of flood dragons, so how was that black python able to take the rudimentary form of a black flood dragon? How was it able to grow dragon feet with 4 claws? Did these pythons encounter some rare opportunity?" The mountain lord, who had introduced himself as Weibo, carefully replied, "That's right, they did indeed come across a rare opportunity. However, this underling isn't sure about the exact time that this occurred, and I can only guess that it's somehow related to Jewel's small world. They definitely swallowed some strange thing by accident, and this strange thing was definitely something that's extremely beneficial to snakes and fish." Red Candle Town, which is located close to the border of Go Table Mountain, is a place where 3 rivers converge. One of these rivers is called Rushing Tranquil River, and inside this river is a carp that's grown 2 genuine dragon whiskers. This is something that others are extremely envious of. Around 100 years ago, this carp followed the flow of the river, stream, and mountain spring as it continued to swim upstream, eventually arriving at Go Table Mountain, where I was able to personally catch a glimpse of it. Theoretically speaking, it shouldn't have been able to grow such astonishing dragon whiskers, even if it were given 500 more years. Aoyang nodded and said in realization, "After hearing this, I have a slight idea of the situation now." Weibo glanced at the saber by Aoyang's waist and asked in a tentative manner, "Great Immortal, How did you learn about this bamboo cane's history? There was a strange expression on Aoyang's face, and he laughed as he avoided the question, saying instead, I traveled around the bamboo sea small world when I was young, and I'm slightly acquainted with Lady Zhuhou in that small world. However, our relationship isn't that tight. It's fairly ordinary. Very ordinary. An expression of yearning spread across Wei Bo's face when he heard the title Lady Zhuhou. One had to realize that she was the sole deity in the bamboo sea small world, and she was someone who rarely ever appeared before others. It was rumored that she was extremely slender and taller than most men. A founder of the school of fiction, one of the 100 schools of thought, once made the resolve to travel through the 4 worlds and record the local cultures and customs of each place. In his travel log, he explicitly described Madame Zhu as beautiful in appearance, joyful in bare feet, with hair jet black. Even though Wei Bo was also a mountain lord in the same vein as Lady Zhu, he was far inferior to her in both status and cultivation base. In fact, the gulf between them was so large that Wei Bo couldn't even bring himself to feel shame. Instead, he could only feel a sense of respect and reverence toward her. Stories of Lady Zhu's deeds were also widespread, and this resulted in her becoming a familiar name even in Eastern Treasured Vile continent. Beneath the 10 large worlds were the 36 small worlds. Zhu's small world that had hovered above the Great Li Empire before was one of the latter. This small world had measured thousands of kilometers in range, yet it had only been the smallest of the 36 small worlds. Qi refiners often referred to small worlds as mystical realms, and this was in order to distinguish them from large worlds. Mystical realms were generally brimming with spiritual energy, yet compared to the 10 large worlds, the land inside them appeared comparatively damaged and incomplete. This was because these mystical realms were potentially born from ancient ruins or battlefields. Their history was complicated, and there was even a mystical realm called the Island Small World. This was a mystical realm that housed numerous ancient islands that had mysteriously disappeared from the world. In fact, this was a mystical realm that was surprisingly located in the abdomen of a primordial beast, the island engulfing whale. Meanwhile, the bamboo sea small world was one of the highest-ranked small worlds, and it specialized in growing all kinds of incredible bamboo that were viewed with great importance by generation after generation of immortals and cultivators. These stalks of bamboo could be refined into all kinds of artifacts that would quickly gain renown in the cultivation world. Only a single transcendent immortal clan existed in the small world, the long-established Azure Divine Mountain. According to legends, the founder of the clan had once sought knowledge from Confucius, and he had brought a young merit bamboo plant with him as a gift. Afterward, this bamboo plant had flourished in the Forest of Morality that was located in the sacred lands of the Confucian sect. On the contrary, the merit bamboo plants in the bamboo sea small world became increasingly dry and withered. It was said that this kind of bamboo could record the merits and faults of virtuous people. At the same time, this was also one of the origins of the commonly mentioned merit register. While Aoyang and Wei Bo chatted, Chen Ping'an sat on a boulder with his snapped machete in hand. Nearby, there were 2 large and terrifying pythons. They exchanged glances with Chen Ping'an, and their bodies were like 2 long and winding mountain paths that snaked and vanished into the forest. The occasional sound of trees being pulverized by their powerful tails could be heard. During their travels, Chen Ping'an was not only learning characters from Li Baoping, but he was even learning the official dialect of the Great Li Empire from her. He was progressing quite well, though his pronunciation naturally still carried a thick accent from the small town. Even so, he was able to convey his points more often than not during normal conversations. Using this newly learned official dialect, Chen Ping'an told the 2 previously hostile pythons about the 5 mountains that he had purchased in Dragon Spring County. He hoped that they could move to Downtrodden Mountain, and he naturally didn't forget to mention the fact that the sage, Master Ruan, had loaned 3 mountains from him. Compared to Chen Ping'an, it was clear that the pythons were far more aware of the might of the sages who were guarding Zhu's small world. Even the black python, who had indifference in its eyes the entire time, developed a different expression. As for the white python, it had wavered slightly upon the mere mention of Dragon Spring County. After hearing that the Great Li Empire had already dispatched a geomantic official from the Ministry of Astronomy and officials from the Ministry of Rites to survey 60 or so mountains, and that the emperor was going to appoint more than one official mountain god, an unconcealed sense of excitement and anticipation appeared in the white python's eyes. It couldn't help but fervently hiss in emotion. However, the black python ferociously bumped it with its head, causing it to fall silent again. Chen Ping'an breathed a sigh of relief when the pythons didn't immediately reject his proposal. He continued, "Even though I have little understanding of cultivation, I can say with absolute certainty that the spiritual energy in Gotable Mountain is far inferior to the spiritual energy in my mountains. Perhaps cultivating for 100 years in my mountains will be equivalent to cultivating for several hundred years here." While coming here, Aoyang also told me more about the process of fish and snakes transforming into dragons. This is a treacherous path on which many mountain gods and river gods will purposely obstruct you and make things more difficult for you. If you can build good relationships with Master Ruan and the officials from the Great Li Empire early on, perhaps this path will become much easier to walk in the future. Chen Ping'an had prepared the first half of this speech by himself. Meanwhile, the second half was some smart persuasion that Aoyang had taught him to say. Chen Ping'an's voice became solemn as he said, "The old man who taught me how to fire pottery once said that mountain spirits and ghosts and river demons and monsters aren't necessarily more evil than humans. When I saw you two, I felt like his words didn't make any sense. However, you two were subdued by Aoyang and not me, so I can't say much now that Aoyang has decided to spare you. If I were as powerful as Aoyang, and if you two still dared to provoke me or wantonly eat people in front of me." Chen Ping'an gestured with the broken machete in his hand as he stared at the white python, continuing, "Then you won't simply lose half of your wing. Instead, last night's supper would have been a large pot of stewed snake meat." After losing its wing, the white python's cultivation base had also been severely affected. This had distressed it greatly. After having more salt poured on its wound by the young boy, the cold-blooded beast felt as if its scar were being brutally torn open by someone. It flew into a rage, and it tensed its body as it reared its head, ready to lunge forward and kill the detestable young boy. Chen Ping'an was unfazed. The black python also moved, but it wasn't to help the white python target Chen Ping'an. Instead, it widened its jaws and viciously bit down on the white python's neck before whipping around and tossing its slender companion aside, causing it to become dazed and confused. Weibo was given a start, and he was just about to step forward to tell the two pythons to calm down, lest they accidentally wound the young boy and drag him into their mess. However, Aoyang lightly shook his head and said, "Don't interfere." The young mountain lord was slightly puzzled, and he couldn't help but steal a glance at the man. Aoyang was still leaning there, with his arms crossed and with one foot on the bamboo and one foot on the ground. His posture was lazy, and his expression was calm. Meanwhile, the two pythons ferociously glowered at each other. Chen Ping'an stood up, but he didn't jump down from the boulder. Instead, he tightened his grip on the broken machete. He didn't know what the two pythons hissed to each other, but he saw the white python finally start to calm down a little. However, its gaze was still filled with aggression and intensity as it glared at Chen Ping'an. Chen Ping'an stared right back at the white python and he said, "Right now there are tens of thousands of people laying paths in the mountains. After entering the mountains to cultivate, you're not allowed to kill people for the sake of filling your bellies. Of course, it's a completely different matter if you kill them in self-defense, for example, if you kill someone who's especially entered the mountains to hunt you. But remember, if you two break the rules after obtaining all the benefits, Master Ruan definitely won't show any mercy. What you two did before this moment has got nothing to do with me. However, if you agree to my proposal and enter my mountains, then what you two do in the future has got everything to do with me. And that's why I'm giving these unpleasant warnings beforehand." Chen Ping'an finished with a serious expression. The black python remained silent and unmoving. However, the white python was seething with irrepressible rage. Even though it had abandoned its urge to lash out at Chen Ping'an, and even with the enticement of the Great Tao before it, it still couldn't help but lightly rub its belly against the ground, with an aura of impatience and violence oozing from its body. In the distant bamboo forest, Aoyang had already chosen to sit down on a stalk of bamboo at some unknown time. This was an extremely flexible and tough stalk of bamboo, and it had been forcefully bent into the shape of an arch as Aoyang casually sat on it. Weibo, who was feeling an intense urge to straighten the stalk of bamboo with his hands, stole a quick glance at the greatly disparate confrontation between Chen Ping'an and the two pythons and explained, "Even though the black python is the more ruthless and cruel of the two, It's also the more intelligent of the two. In fact, it's already learned the ability to judge the situation and act accordingly, understanding when to advance and when to retreat. The white python appears more harmless and less intent on hurting others, but it's actually comparatively more difficult to communicate with it. This is largely because it's still acting on its primal instincts. Interestingly, this is also related to the original locations of their burrows on Go Table Mountain. The white python was only an idle piece, while the black python was a critical piece in slaying the ferocious dragon. As a result, these two rulers of Go Table Mountain are completely different in temperament. The white python likes to slither around and cause all kinds of commotion. As for the black python, it prefers to focus on cultivation, and it earnestly absorbs the essence of the sun and moon every day. This is because it harbors lofty goals and ambitions. All Young nodded in response. Weibo hesitated a little before saying, "The young boy isn't wrong, and everything he said is quite reasonable. However, he still lacks an understanding of the python's temperament and habits. After entering the path of cultivation, staying true to their hearts and minds is the foundation of their great Tao. In addition, pythons that have gained sentience more or less understand the concept of face. Since they've become accustomed to ruling over Go Table Mountain, they'll naturally feel like they're being suppressed and controlled if they go to the young boy's mountain. This is especially the case since he mentioned the sage and threatened them with death if they dared to eat people. This will further cause the pythons to feel like Chan Pingin's trying to suppress them, and it will inevitably cause them to feel more enraged. After all, agreeing to his proposal will potentially tie them to him for hundreds of years. As such, it's only natural that they're worried about his character and trustworthiness." All Young interrupted the mountain lord's rambling and said, "You don't need to speak up for your neighbors in such a roundabout manner. I already said that I won't interfere, so what are you afraid of?" At the end of the day, the two pythons are unwilling to yield so easily, because they feel like Chan Pingin doesn't have the right to negotiate with them, being only at the second martial arts tier. Even if his requests are reasonable, the pythons will still feel like they're overbearing and intolerable. If it were me negotiating with them instead, how do you think the pythons would react? Weibo smiled in a self-ridiculing manner and praised, "Great Immortal, your understanding of the situation is as clear as a brilliant flame." "Answer my question," All Young said calmly. Weibo immediately fell silent in fear and trepidation. After carefully organizing his words in his mind, he answered with a solemn expression, "They'll instantly agree to move without a second thought. They won't dare to feel even a shred of anger or discontent." All Young nodded as he observed the situation with a relaxed expression. "Very well. You've preserved half of your bamboo forest." A burst of crackling and rustling sounded in the surrounding bamboo forest. Surprisingly, it was as if half of the bamboo forest had been severed at the waist, with the felled bamboo stalks falling to the ground. Weibo fell to his knees and stammered in apprehension. "Please calm down, oh great immortal." All Young had no time for him, and he replied with a cold expression, "See? Even though I've already displayed my might and frightened everyone once, I'm still being taken for a fool by a measly mountain lord simply because I'm too friendly and soft-spoken. I must say, it's quite difficult to be a good person." The young mountain lord didn't dare to say anything. All Young suddenly chuckled and continued, "Stand up and speak. It won't look good if you keep kneeling there like that. I'll make a bet with you. We'll bet on whether that miserly young boy is willing to make a huge concession. You'll wager that he is, and I'll wager that he isn't. If you win, you can keep the remaining half of your bamboo forest. If you lose, however, didn't you just recover your physical form? I'll pummel you back to your original form." Weibo had only just stood up, and he looked like he wanted to die at this moment. "Dare I ask, great immortal, what are my chances of winning the bet?" he murmured. All Young raised a single finger. The color drained from Weibo's face. "Only a measly 10%. The man with the bamboo hat grinned and said, "Just 1%. He then turned to Chan Pingin and shouted, "Chan Pingin, feel free to set as many conditions as you want. It doesn't matter how unreasonable or preposterous they are. I'll be watching over things, so don't be afraid of angering the two beasts. If things really do get physical, then it'll also be a good opportunity for me to practice my moves against the two pythons. Rest assured, I'll definitely keep an eye on everything, and if the situation calls for it, I'll definitely rush over to help." In any case, didn't you spar with Zhuhou the 5th tier elite just then? It was clear that you comprehended something after the sparring session, so why don't you strike the iron while it's still hot? Perhaps you'll be able to comprehend even more things. Wei Bo was completely stupefied. Aoyang smiled and said, "Sorry, your chance of winning just dropped to 0%. Wei Bo's expression was ashen, and this perilous situation instead caused him to find an extra burst of courage. He smiled bitterly and complained, "Senior Aoyang, you're a very immoral gambler." Aoyang offered a strange response, saying, "Do you really think I went through all that trouble to set up a scenario where I'll achieve certain victory? Do I, Aoyang, look like such a senseless person to you?" The young mountain lord carefully ruminated over these words. When he looked at Chan Ping'an again, there was both envy and pity in his eyes. A short moment later, a burst of white sword intent that was mighty enough to shake mountains soared into the sky. Wei Bo fell onto his rear in fright. Aoyang's figure instantly vanished from the stalk of bent bamboo, and he arrived high above Go Table Mountain and ferociously drew the green bamboo saber from his side. The soaring white ray was ruthlessly severed and prevented from rising any further. Another moment later, Aoyang had already reappeared on the stalk of bamboo that hadn't even had the time to straighten. He casually tossed aside the damaged saber that had been made from ordinary bamboo. Even though it hadn't snapped, the blade of the saber had already become splintered and disfigured. The black python madly fled into the dense forest of Go Table Mountain. Before the young boy, the white python that had suddenly lunged at him without any warning was already lying there without its head. Its bloody and mangled neck was completely exposed, and this was an extremely harrowing and ghastly sight. However, Chan Ping'an's expression was calm as he cracked a grin. The look in his eyes was identical to when he had killed Kai Jinjian from Dawn Cloud Mountain in the small alley. Aoyang held back a smile as he untied the small gourd from his waist. He took a large swig of wine and chuckled softly. Things are starting to get a little interesting now. The stalk of green bamboo suddenly shot upright, and as it turned out, this was because Aoyang had jumped down to drag the mountain lord up. He clucked his tongue and chuckled. "I might be an immoral gambler, but you're also a very fortunate gambler." Wei Bo's face was as white as a sheet, and the deep frown on his face didn't show any signs of relaxing. Even though he had survived his brush with disaster and preserved the remaining half of the bamboo forest, he still couldn't help but feel a mix of complicated emotions as he gazed at the headless white python in the distance. They had been neighbors for hundreds of years, and even though they were hostile neighbors who always had small skirmishes with each other, things were ultimately quite calm and peaceful. At the very least, they had never engaged in a life-or-death battle. Today, the white python should have been slithering onto a dazzling cultivation path that was filled with opportunities. However, it was also at this moment that its head was unfortunately obliterated by someone's intense sword intent. One could easily imagine Wei Bo's deep sense of shock. He sighed and bowed in dejection, saying softly, "Senior, you're absolutely right. I'm a sordid and detestable person who will try to take advantage of others if I'm not set straight once in a while. However, you've truly set me straight today. Senior Aoyang, please have pity on me. I'm genuinely terrified right now, and I won't dare to have any untoward thoughts anymore. Please command me as you please, Senior Aoyang. This underling will definitely obey your every word." Aoyang didn't play any more mind games on him, and he nodded as he glanced down at the empty bamboo scabbard by his waist. "Pick a stalk of good quality mature bamboo for me. I need to make a new saber. Just treat it as a greeting gift to me from your friend. Also, what's with all this bamboo that's mysteriously fallen to the ground? There are so many of them, and it'll be a shame if they go to waste." Wei Bo grimaced, but he only dared to grumble in his mind. "Senior Aoyang, this is called losing your conscience." "Aoyang? Liang Mayasang." Aoyang stroked his chin and continued, "My friend just agreed to a bad deal and indirectly helped you win the remaining half of the bamboo forest. It's important for people to show gratitude and give back. What do you say?" Wei Bo smiled bitterly and replied, "Of course, it's naturally the right thing to do." Chan Ping'an ran over to the corpse of the white python and hacked off its remaining wing with his machete. This wing was glistening and translucent, and it was as long as his arm. It was also cool to the touch, and under the warm sunshine, it continued to glisten with dazzling colors. While chatting with Aoyang before, Aoyang had told him that the most valuable parts of this white python were its gallbladder and wings. Just its wings alone were worth an absolute fortune. Moreover, this was something that was in high demand but extremely low supply. As for the bones and tendons of the white python, these were also very rare and valuable parts. Compared to its gallbladder and wings, however, these parts were barely worth a mention. Chen Ping'an tied his machete to his waist and jogged toward the bamboo forest. However, what he saw was the young mountain lord squatting down and uprooting a stalk of bamboo with both his hands. Intertwining bamboo roots that were jade green in color peeked out from the ground, and with a tug, they were forcefully pulled out. The surrounding soil was sent flying through the air. Wei Bo was drenched in sweat, and he unconsciously gulped when he saw Chen Ping'an, the thief with the gold belt. He carefully placed the bamboo on the ground before lowering his head and looking around. In the end, he chose a stalk of dark green bamboo that was as thick as an infant's arm. He sighed as he looked up at Chen Ping'an, and he said with a forced smile, "Can I borrow your machete for a moment?" Chen Ping'an walked over and handed the broken machete to the young mountain lord. Wei Bo grabbed the machete and took a deep breath before cutting the bamboo and handing it to Aoyang. Aoyang shook his head and chuckled. "Just make me a bamboo saber like the one I had before. You can give it to me along with the white donkey when we reach the border of Go Table Mountain." Wei Bo naturally didn't dare to refuse this request. After returning the machete to Chen Ping'an, he sighed with emotion and said sincerely, "What a sharp blade." Chen Ping'an accepted the machete and thought for a moment before replying, "I can give it to you if you want it. In any case, this broken machete isn't suitable for cutting trees and shrubs anymore, so it's not all that useful to me." "A noble person seizes not the favored items of others," Wei Bo said with a wry smile. "You want it, but you're too embarrassed to take it for free?" Aoyang asked with a chuckle. "Then you can buy it. You can make a fair deal with Chen Ping'an, right?" A look of realization spread across Wei Bo's face. He stood up and clapped the soil from his hands before smiling at Chen Ping'an and saying, "Villagers and woodsmen who frequently enter the mountains know that bamboo forests that are too dense are actually detrimental to the overall growth of the bamboo. Only with the correct spacing and density will the bamboo be able to grow taller and tougher. Because of this, it's necessary for me to cut some of the bamboo. Moreover, the most valuable part of this bamboo forest isn't the stalks of bamboo, but instead the roots of the bamboo." I took the opportunity to borrow the bamboo saber from Senior Aoyang just then, and I cut down some of the excess bamboo. I initially wanted to build a small bamboo house where I could relax and enjoy the scenery. Wei Bo became increasingly fluent as he spoke, and he continued, "However, Senior Aoyang's bamboo saber is broken now, and to be honest with you, I'm ashamed to say that I took a liking to your broken machete from the very first moment I saw it. Why don't I make a bamboo saber and build a small bamboo house as well? When I finish making the bamboo saber, I'll be able to give it to Senior Aoyang right away. However, I'm afraid that the bamboo house will take a while longer. I'll accompany the black python when it heads over to Downtrodden Mountain, and this will allow me to prevent it from causing any trouble. At the same time, I can also have it carry this bamboo for me. When I arrive at Downtrodden Mountain, I'll find a scenic and serene location to build a bamboo house for you." Chen Ping'an turned to Aoyang, and the man with the bamboo hat explained, "The Bamboo Sea Small World has 10 important celestial bamboos. Bamboo have 10 virtuous qualities, and each of the celestial bamboo corresponds to one of these qualities. The ancestor of the bamboo forest around us was a descendant of the courage bamboo, and its descendants have also been able to glean some of its fortunes. Martial artists and military cultivators will obtain great benefits if they reside or cultivate in a bamboo house built from this bamboo." Wei Bo hurriedly concurred, chiming, "That's right. The bamboo in this forest are all descendants of that courage bamboo. The army morale is high and our momentum is like a sharp sword slicing through bamboo. A few nodes cut, and the remainder will naturally split." This phrase from the historical records is a perfect description of the aura exuded by the bamboo in this forest. Thus, cultivating in such a bamboo building will certainly nurture one's soul. Chen Ping'an was just about to speak, but Aoyang quickly walked over and wrapped his arm around his shoulders, dragging him away from the bamboo forest. "How can I refuse such a warm-hearted offer? As a guest, I can only follow the arrangements of the host. All right, I'm off now. I haven't given him the machete yet." Qin Ping'an said softly. Just give it to him with the other half of the blade later. Aoyang replied casually. The other half of the blade was still sitting in Qin Ping'an's bamboo basket. Afterward, Aoyang didn't forget to say in reminder, you don't need to take the unformed gallbladder of the white python. It's covered in blood and quite harrowing to look at. Just feed it to the black python along with the other python meat. Even with its wings gone, this will still allow it to gain 200 to 300 years of cultivation. You can think of this as a gesture of goodwill. Also, remember to tell it to behave itself and cultivate earnestly when it arrives at Downtrodden Mountain. Finally, Aoyang pointed at the despondent mountain lord and said, you better shape up. Weibo stood on the fringes of the bamboo forest as he gazed at the backs of the man and young boy. The breeze in the mountain blew past the lush green trees and bright red flowers, bringing with it a refreshing fragrance. The handsome young man's white robes fluttered in this breeze, and as he held the bamboo cane that signified his status as mountain lord, his expression of shock, fear, and hesitation was quickly whisked away by the wind. What replaced it was an expression of solemn dignity befitting his status as the deity of the mountain. He looked around before sighing with emotion and saying softly, every cloud has a silver lining. Is this not the perfect example? Thank you for your unintentional guidance, Senior Aoyang. Thank you for untying the knot in my heart and vanquishing my internal demons. Weibo shut his eyes and a warm smile tugged at the corners of his lips as he murmured, from times immemorial, famed mountains have always enjoyed the residence of sages. Though what does it matter if no sage visits? I can cultivate in earnest and become a sage. When he opened his eyes again, a pale gold earring had already appeared on his ear. The exquisite earring swayed lightly in the mountain breeze, complementing his handsome appearance and making him appear like a formal mountain god. Qin Ping'an and Aoyang returned to the pool. They strolled slowly as if in tacit understanding, and this was in stark contrast to their brisk pace when they had come. Aoyang, will the black python really eat the corpse of the white python? Weren't they companions for hundreds of years? Qin Ping'an asked. The black python has ambitions of transforming into a flood dragon, so of course it will eat the corpse of the white python, Aoyang replied. In fact, all spirits, demons, and monsters can rely on eating others to improve their cultivation. This isn't unique to snakes and flood dragons. However, snakes that reside in mountains are especially vicious when it comes to killing and eating their own kind. This is similar to how two tigers cannot share one mountain for. In fact, the black python has already developed sentience and become intelligent, so it might have only left the white python alive to allow it to form its core. At that time, it would then enjoy a scrumptious meal. Oh, that's right. If you want to see the black python eating the white python, we can turn around and head back. I'm good. Anyhow, don't blame me for making the decision for you and letting the black python eat the white python's gallbladder. Since it agreed to go to Downtrodden Mountain to guard its fortune for you, giving it the snake gallbladder will reap you far richer rewards than simply selling it to someone else, regardless of how much you sell it for. In fact, I'm more curious about why you decided to kill the white python. Why didn't you wait for my help? If I subdued the white python, you could have ordered it to go to Treasured Scripture Mountain or Rainbow Cloud Mountain. No matter which mountain it went to, it would have been quite a good outcome for you. Perhaps you were afraid that I wouldn't help. How is that possible? I trust you, Aoyang. Then, Aoyang probed. Before answering your question, I also want to ask you a question. Aoyang, when I was sparring with Zhuhou before, did you already identify the locations of 3 acupoints that I found? And have you already found out the truth about these acupoints? Qin Ping'an asked. To tell you the truth, I noticed something strange about those 3 acupoints the first time I saw you. There's something profoundly mystical about them. And I'm a bit embarrassed to say that even I can't decipher the truth behind them. The only thing I could determine was that these acupoints contain 3 wisps of sword qi, each with a different Tao intent. In terms of what Tao intents these are, I don't dare to make any conclusions. Of course, it would be extremely easy for me to forcefully observe the situation inside your acupoints if I were willing to damage your body and qi. However, that would be an incredibly low act. As a supreme master, I naturally have to maintain my image and demeanor. I understand. Aoyang, do you know about the archway in our small town? And the 4 plaques on it? Yes, I'm aware, Aoyang replied. Qi Jingchan mentioned it to me before, but I've already forgotten all the details. One of the plaques has the characters, refrain from looking outward. My neighbor is a knowledgeable person the same age as me, and he told me that these words are a Buddhist allegory. It's telling people to devote themselves to Buddhism and not to seek things from other teachings or sections. I found this quite reasonable in the beginning. However, I started to contemplate these words more when I went into the mountains to collect firewood. I pondered this when I was bored, and I felt like it would make more sense for me to give it my best shot before I went to offer incense to Buddha or pay my respects to the Bodhisattvas. Asking these deities for help should be the last resort after failing to achieve my goals through my own efforts, and only at that point will they agree to provide assistance. Otherwise, why should they help us? Right, Aoyang? Seek the answer from within before seeking the answer from Buddha, Aoyang remarked. Yes, that's it. That's exactly what I'm trying to say. This is a barely passable explanation. However, let me make this clear to you. Just a fraction of my spare change is more than your entire wealth. You felt like you were troubling me, so you were willing to sacrifice a wisp of sword chi instead? To tell you the truth, I could have disposed of the white python with a casual flick of my blade. How are you going to justify this? It's not the same thing, Chen Ping'an retorted. Aoyang waited for an explanation. Old Man Yao, the person who taught me how to fire pottery, was rarely ever willing to speak to me. However, there were 2 occasions when he spoke to me in a very serious manner. The first time was when I became an apprentice in the kilns. He said that it was fine for me to learn from him, but if I ever dared to slack off, I could piss off from the kilns. The second time was when I entered the mountains with him. He said that I could go with him to search for clay, but if I dared to cry in front of him, he would never take me into the mountains again. He didn't care about the reason, even if it was because I broke my leg or whatnot. What's this got to do with anything? What are you trying to say, Chen Ping'an? Then how about this? Aoyang, do you like to sleep in? Nonsense. Do you not? Aoyang replied. Of course I do. However, believe it or not, I've never slept in ever since the day I became an apprentice in the kilns. I always wake up on time. What's with all this roundabout explanation? What are you actually trying to say? Are you picking on me because I'm not well read? Aoyang questioned. What I'm trying to say is that when it comes to matters that we view as bad, we should never involve ourselves in them, not even once. We can't allow ourselves to have a first time. Otherwise, the only person who will suffer will be ourselves, Chen Ping'an explained. Take me for example. If I decided to slack off even once, I would have definitely failed to become an apprentice in the kilns. Not only that, but I wouldn't have been able to enter the mountains with Old Man Yao either. If that's the case, then how could I be where I am now? Perhaps I would be in a similar situation to those few thousand young men from the small town. I would go into the mountains to lay paths and build bridges every day, only earning a single copper coin a day to show for it. If things panned out like this, how could I possibly own 5 mountains? 5 mountains? Just how much are they worth? Do you understand, Aoyang? If you have an opportunity in the future, you definitely have to visit and take a look at my mountains. Stop. Chen Ping'an, after beating around the bush for so long, you were just trying to flaunt your wealth to me, Aoyang exclaimed. Aoyang, it's very clear that you're not well read, Chen Ping'an replied. Aoyang, if a bamboo building is genuinely constructed in downtrodden mountain in the future, why don't you help me come up with a name for it? How about Aoyang is very badass building? Aoyang suggested. Does that sound impressive enough? What, you're afraid that its aura will suppress yours, the ruler of the mountains? Alright then, I'll change it to something more reserved. We'll just call it the badass building. I'm already sacrificing a lot, so are you happy with it now? Aoyang, I suddenly feel like it's not a bad idea to leave the building nameless, Chen Ping'an said. Aoyang rolled his eyes. Chen Ping'an roared with laughter and said, I'm just kidding. The badass building it is. Aoyang suddenly turned around and asked, Do you want to learn swordsmanship? Chen Ping'an shook his head and replied, Not at the moment. Aoyang smiled in understanding and guessed, You're afraid of getting distracted? You're afraid that it will affect you practicing the fist technique. Chen Ping'an sighed and nodded in affirmation. Aoyang was well aware of why Chen Ping'an was sighing. During their battle with the pythons in Go Table Mountain, the young boy had exhausted all of his accumulated progress in order to block the attack of the white python and save Zhuhou. After working so hard on walking meditation, Chen Ping'an had finally made some minor progress with the mountain-shaking fist. However, his actions had immediately sent him back to square one. This was analogous to a poor person with little savings suddenly losing everything again, returning to a miserable life in a bare house that couldn't block wind or rain. In any case, walking meditation was something that could strengthen his physique. At the same time, it was also something that Chen Ping'an had to practice out of necessity in order to prolong his life. Meanwhile, standing meditation was something that could nurture his soul. After making some advances during his battle with the pythons, Chen Ping'an was able to take advantage of his sparring match with Zhu He and accurately locate the 3 acupoints that the sword chi were hidden in. This then prepared him for his actions just then. Are you sad that you've lost such a powerful and potentially life-saving trump card? Aoyang asked in a teasing voice. Not at all, Chen Ping'an replied without hesitation. I was finally able to let out everything that was pent up inside me. I feel much better now. Tell me about it, Aoyang said with a smile. Chen Ping'an gazed ahead and said, I'm willing to reason with other people, and I'm also able to convince others to listen to my reasoning. This kind of feeling is amazing. In the past, I practiced martial arts for the sake of strengthening my physique. More accurately, it was to prolong my life. Now, however, I feel like I can cast my gaze further and higher. The turtles were native to Go Table Mountain, so they were naturally very familiar with the mountain paths. Moreover, their ability to traverse mountainous terrains was also far superior to donkeys and hinnies, so it wasn't long before they arrived at the outskirts of Go Table Mountain. If they used the post road and headed south for another 10 kilometers, they would arrive in Red Candle Town. Even though this post road was obstructed and partially cut off due to the sudden fall of Jewel's small world, Chen Ping'an and the others still decided against using it out of an abundance of caution. They didn't want the 3 giant turtles to startle the hunters, woodsmen, or merchants. Chen Ping'an and the others took a break on the top of a small mountain. Li Huai looked around in anticipation. Even though he detested the young mountain lord, Aoyang had said that the horizontal treasure pagoda was filled with treasures, one for each of them. Li Huai was extremely eager to get his hands on one, and he was thinking about how he would show off to his sister Li Lu when he saw her again in the future. Weibo quickly arrived as promised. He didn't use his mystical power to travel through the earth this time, and he instead strode up the mountain with his white robes billowing in the air, and his large sleeves fluttering like 2 wandering clouds. Even Li Baoping's maidservant Zhu Lu had to concede that the young mountain lord was the living embodiment of the description, spirited and handsome. Behind the handsome mountain lord were Aoyang's white donkey and the Li clan's horse. Not only had they kept up with everyone, but the donkey and horse didn't appear tired at all. Weibo had most likely used some kind of mystical ability. Carrying the long wooden box in his arms, Weibo, who was heaven knows how many 100 years old, first bowed and paid his respects to Aoyang. Aoyang nodded back in acknowledgement. At this moment, the shrewd mountain lord and the light-hearted swordsman surprisingly gave off the same feeling. It was as if they were companions pursuing the same great Tao. Weibo handed the bright red wooden box to Aoyang, and Li Huai hurriedly ran over to caress the box that was made from some unknown wood. The wooden box was warm to the touch, and it felt as if he were running his hands over the most valuable silk satin in one of Dragon Riding Alley's fabric stores. He had gone to a fabric store with his mom and sister to get clothes made at the end of last year, and he had been angrily kicked out by a fuming shop owner after secretly touching a beautiful brocade that was decorated with flowers and birds. Li Huai looked up and asked, Aoyang, let's discuss something. After dividing the treasures, can you give this wooden box to me? And just who do you think you are? Aoyang answered in retort. After you marry my sister, I'll naturally be your brother-in-law. Li Huai replied with a serious expression. Aoyang smacked him on the head and said, Then call me older brother. Actually, I don't want to be a brother-in-law anymore, the little boy suddenly said. They're some of the worst people in the world. Aoyang turned to Weibo and asked, Is the box valuable? Weibo smiled in self-ridicule and replied, It's not too bad. It's made from delicate yellow ebony, and it's become more fragrant after being buried in the earth for some years. Its color has also turned from yellow to red. I wouldn't call it valuable, but it is indeed quite rare. Aoyang looked down at the expectant little boy and said, "Since it's not valuable, I might as well give it to you." Li Huai was just about to snatch the box from Aoyang's hands in excitement. However, he was smacked on the head again and Aoyang scolded. "Are you trying to take all the treasures for yourself?" Aoyang looked around before waving his hands and gesturing for everyone to come over. He then squatted down and opened the long wooden box, shouting, "Chun Ping'an, little Baoping Lin Shui, Zhuhi Zhulu, come over here. It's time to share the spoils. First come, first serve. There's only a single rule. You're only allowed to take a single treasure from the box, and you're not allowed to exchange it after you make your choice." Chun Ping'an looked toward the young mountain lord. Weibo detected his gaze, and he asked in a gentle but puzzled voice, "You're not going to fight for this fated opportunity?" "I'll let them pick first," Chun Ping'an replied with a smile. Coincidentally, Chun Ping'an had something that he wanted to discuss with the young mountain lord. This pertained to how the black python would settle down in Downtrodden Mountain, as well as the situation surrounding Weibo after he left this area and set off for Dragon Spring County. When returning from the bamboo forest, Aoyang had roughly told him about formal mountain gods and river gods, and how they couldn't casually leave their officially designated territories as they pleased. This was similar to how many empires and nations imposed the rule of feudal lords shall not meet. If this rule was broken, the offending gods would face punishment of varying severity. On the lower end of the scale, they would be admonished by the imperial court and have their incense offerings reduced. On the more severe end of the scale, their godly rank would be lowered, and they would receive no incense offerings for a set number of years. Throughout history, there were some mountain gods and river gods who suffered even more miserable fates. Their statues were removed from the shrines and dragged from their pedestals, after which the law enforcers would beat them with sticks to serve as a warning to others. Sometimes, the local official would personally whip the statues. In fact, some local officials would even command enlisted commoners to use hammers to smash the statues to pieces. Such kinds of punishment were common throughout all the empires and nations. Thus, even though Chun Ping'an was willing to accept Weibo's gesture of goodwill, where he would personally bring the black python to Downtrodden Mountain and also construct a building out of courage bamboo for him, he certainly didn't want Weibo to suffer severe punishment because of this. In fact, Chun Ping'an was still barely able to understand the situation surrounding gods and offerings, empires and feng shui. This was partly because Aoyang always liked to hop between topics, causing his explanations to be extremely convoluted and confusing. In order to flaunt his knowledge, Aoyang would sometimes use the most complicated words and profound reasoning to explain the most simple things. In the end, it was thanks to Li Baoping's example that Chun Ping'an was finally able to understand the situation. The little girl had said that incense offerings and fate were just like the situation surrounding Dragon Whisker Creek outside their small town. This was the only source of water in the area, so in order to raise their crops and improve their yields, the surrounding commoners would all fight tooth and nail for water. Large-scale brawls would break out almost every year. Little Baoping ran up to Chun Ping'an and asked anxiously, "Junior uncle, why aren't you going over to pick a treasure? Look, even someone like Lin Shui is sprinting over to make a pick. And Li Huai is more so trying to stick his head into the treasure box." "It's fine, I'll pick last," Chun Ping'an replied casually. "Don't worry, junior uncle. I'll pick a treasure for you," Little Baoping said as she turned around and ran back. Chun Ping'an was just about to speak, but the little girl in the bright red jacket had already run back to Aoyang's side. She shoved aside Li Huai's head with one hand, and she pushed aside Lin Shui's shoulder with her other. "Li Baoping, you're bullying me," Li Huai shouted in grief. Little Baoping looked at him and said in a righteous manner, "I'm picking a treasure for junior uncle." Thinking about the bamboo bookcase that he was yet to receive, Li Huai could only sigh and say, "All right, then you pick." Lin Shui wasn't annoyed about being pushed aside, and he simply pointed at a wrinkled and yellowed ancient book inside the treasure box. This book was bound by a thin golden thread, and with the way that it was positioned in the box, they could just make out its title, which was written using seal script. "I'm going to pick this Taoist book, the recite atop cloud scripture. This is all I want, and I won't fight for the other treasures with you guys." Li Huai leaned forward and craned his neck, allowing him to look past Li Baoping. He glanced at the treasures and asked, "Shui, why didn't you pick that saber?" Look at how beautiful it is. If it were me, I would have definitely chosen the saber. It took great willpower from Lin Shui for him to drag his eyes from the saber that occupied the most space in the treasure box. I'm not suited to practice martial arts, and I don't like to wield swords and sabers either, he replied softly. Seeing Lin Shui refuse to budge from his choice, Li Huai turned to Li Baoping and encouraged. This saber is clearly a peerless divine weapon with a blade of unparalleled sharpness. I reckon it could even sever the chains hanging above the iron lock well. Li Baoping, you really don't want this supreme treasure? In any case, doesn't your junior uncle need a new weapon? I think this saber will be a good match for him. Taking a step back, just how impressive will he appear if he uses this saber to chop trees and slash shrubs as he makes his way through the mountains? It'll definitely be better than using a broken machete, no? The slender saber was like a refined lady hiding in her room. The blade quietly rested inside its white scabbard, and its curves were astonishing in their beauty. Aoyang smiled as he bent down and unsheathed the saber. The might of the saber was unrestrained, and it was as if the blade of the saber were a ray of soaring white light left in the world. There weren't any words carved on the saber, but there were naturally formed veined patterns that looked like the divine cloud patterns carefully engraved by Taoist immortals. Aoyang was slightly surprised, and he lightly flicked the saber with his finger. What he heard wasn't a dull and muddied ring, but instead a crisp and melodious tone. Aoyang listened to this for a brief moment before nodding and saying, "Not bad. This is most likely the bottom-ranked auspicious talisman." Aoyang placed the saber back in its scabbard before handing it to Li Baoping and saying with a smile, "Here, take it. This saber is very suitable for you. In the future, you can look for a sword nurturing gourd and pair it with this saber. You can hang the saber by one side of your waist and the gourd by the other. You can also find yourself a mighty horse and a beautiful red robe. As you ride across the land and drink on a galloping horse, which passerby won't take a liking to you?" Aoyang laughed heartily and remarked, "Indeed, who won't like such a lady?" Li Baoping dazedly accepted the hefty saber. Zhuhou was squatting nearby, and his daughter Zhu had initially not wanted to come over. She had even said in a sullen voice that she wasn't interested in this contemptuous handout. However, Zhu had glowered at her before forcefully dragging her over. This was the first time Zhu had seen her father becoming angry. She was a little afraid, but she still refused to squat down next to her father. Instead, she stubbornly stood next to him with an aloof expression. While Li Baoping was still in a daze, Li Huai seized the opportunity to grab a painted puppet that was exquisitely made and lively in appearance. This was his true target. Lin Shui carefully picked up the wrinkled Taoist book. Holding it in his hands, a rare expression of delight spread across the introverted young boy's face. Meanwhile, Zhu picked a book and an alchemical pill that was encased in mud. He quickly looked up at Aoyang with a stunned expression, and the latter simply chuckled and said, "What's wrong? It's coincidentally something that your daughter needs? There's no need to thank me. If you want to thank someone, then thank Wei Bo and that python for working so hard to accumulate these valuable treasures over hundreds of years, such that they were able to offer us a secret martial arts scripture from an immortal sect and an exclusive alchemical pill from True Martial Mountain." Zhu held the alchemical pill and asked in a quivering voice, "Senior Aoyang, is this really the legendary hero's gall pill?" Aoyang ignored the ecstatic middle-aged man. He cast his gaze further, and he saw Chen Ping'an walking over with Wei Bo. When Wei Bo saw the remaining faint golden seed in the treasure box and the slender saber in Li Baoping's hands, his expression remained calm and unfazed. However, he couldn't help but falter when he saw the books and alchemical pills in the other's hands. He involuntarily looked toward Aoyang. Aoyang ignored his gaze and he said to Chen Ping'an with a smile, "This is the only thing left. However, this is probably what you would have gotten regardless of how early or late you came." Chen Ping'an smiled as he bent down and picked up the lonely faint golden lotus seed, placing it in his sleeve. "Junior uncle, I'll swap with you," Li Baoping said softly. Aoyang said that this saber is very impressive. The little girl hurriedly shut her mouth, with an expression of regret spreading across her face. It was clear that she shouldn't have uttered the second sentence. Sure enough, Chen Ping'an patted her head and said, "Then you should keep it if it's impressive. Your junior uncle doesn't practice saber techniques anyway, and a machete is more than enough for traversing through the mountains." Exactly. Chen Ping'an is a swordsman, so using a saber won't be very suitable, Aoyang teased. So that's why you're still using a bamboo saber? Chen Ping'an retorted. And what are you going to do about that? Aoyang replied. Aoyang, this wooden box is mine now, right? Li Huai asked quietly. Aoyang looked at him and asked, why do you want this box? Do you have that many treasures and belongings to put away? And what are you going to do about that? Li Huai countered in the same way as Aoyang. Everyone received something, even the young mountain lord Wei Bo and the black python. Apart from the white python that had been killed and eaten, it could be said everyone was left happy and satisfied. Chen Ping'an had received a slightly withered lotus seed that was as large as a thumb. Li Baoping had received the slender saber called Auspicious Talisman, yet she was wearing a gloomy expression for some reason. She sulkily placed it inside her small bookcase, though she had thoroughly wrapped it up using a piece of cotton fabric at her junior uncle's suggestion. The saber was completely covered up. Meanwhile, Li Huai had received a painted puppet and the wooden box. The former was temporarily lodging in Li Baoping's bookcase, and before reluctantly putting it in, the little boy had patted his chest and promised the puppet that it would definitely move into a more spacious house after he got his own bookcase. As for Lin Shui, he kept the book recite atop cloud scriptures on him. The title of this book was strange, yet it was filled with an ancient flavor. Even though Zhu Lu was unwilling, she still accepted the secret immortal scripture, Purple Qi Guide. Zhu He was like a thirsty person who had finally come across water, with a wide and unconcealable smile on his usually solemn face. He was feeling far too fortunate at this moment. Right now, this hero's gall pill from True Martial Mountain was worth more to him than a mountain of gold or silver. This was a pill that could gather one's soul even if it had scattered to numerous different acupoints. In the end, it could help a person develop a hero's gall where a Yin god could reside. Zhu He wasn't a qi refiner, nor was he a militarian cultivator. However, the hero's gall pill was rare and valuable exactly because it was useful for pure martial artists like him as well. This was especially the case for those who were stagnant at the peak stage of the 5th tier like him. Obtaining a hero's gall pill was almost equivalent to doubling one's lifespan. How was your conversation with the mountain lord? Aoyang asked softly. Chen Ping'an smiled and replied, it went fairly well. I gave that pouch of things to him as well. Aoyang clucked his tongue in wonder and said, well, you're certainly not someone to dilly-dally. You gave it to him without a shred of hesitation even though I only mentioned it in passing. Moreover, if we talk in a business sense, you should have used that as leverage to make a trade with them. With those two pythons' wealth, I'm sure the black python would have been willing to part with something genuinely valuable regardless of how stingy it is. One shouldn't allow benefits created by one's own work to accrue to others, and a seed planted in spring shall be reaped in autumn. I understand these concepts, Chen Ping'an replied. Aoyang nodded and he fixed his bamboo hat and said, we're almost at Red Candle Town. He then wiped his mouth and murmured, newly brewed apricot blossom wine and decorated boats with beautiful hosts. I Aoyang am back. Chen Ping'an suddenly had a bad feeling about this Red Candle Town that Aoyang seemed to miss so dearly. Wei Bo sighed as he looked at the figures disappearing down the mountain. With a tap of his foot, he leaped onto one of the gigantic turtles' back, where he sat cross-legged and traveled for dozens of kilometers. The black python had a bulging belly as it followed him from afar. Even though its body appeared uncomfortably swollen, its aura had clearly risen by an explosive amount, with an extraordinarily fierce aura radiating into the surroundings. Wei Bo suddenly smiled and tossed the pouch into the black python's path. The black python carefully lowered its head and observed the pouch. After determining that it was harmless, it turned around to look at the mountain lord who was sitting on the forest turtle. The ethereally handsome mountain lord smiled and said, just think of it as a housewarming gift from that young boy. The black python with 4 legs and 4 claws on each foot hesitated briefly before eventually using its fangs to tear open the pouch. A dozen or so snake gall pebbles that Chen Ping'an had collected from Dragon Whisker Creek rolled out onto the ground. However, their luster had already faded, and at a glance, they were no different from the ordinary pebbles in the creek. However, after some careful inspection, a look of scorching fervor appeared in the black python's eyes. At the same time, it was filled with a sense of unease. It was afraid that it would be met with disappointment in the next moment. It slowly hissed and flicked its tongue, cautiously taking one of the pebbles into its mouth. Upon seeing this, Weibo commanded the forest turtle to continue moving forward. They've started to cultivate a good relationship, though I wonder whether this relationship will also conclude on good terms, he murmured to himself. A short moment later, the black python behind him dug its claws into the earth and looked up at the sky as it unleashed a bellow that reverberated throughout the mountains. Countless birds frantically flapped their wings as they fled. Even the young mountain lord was slightly envious, and he muttered to himself, "Apart from Zhuhou's small world, I've heard that such treasures are almost extinct from Eastern treasured Vile continent." Upon ingesting these pebbles, those of the snake and flood dragon families can grow genuine dragon bones and whiskers. When they neared Red Candle Town, the crisp clip-clops of the white donkey rang against the blue stone slabs of the post road. Aoyang wasn't holding the donkey leash, but the donkey would still obediently follow behind him. At this moment, Aoyang vaguely heard the loud bellow behind. He smiled and said, "By the looks of it, it was genuinely useful. I kept the most valuable snake gall pebble. I was reluctant to part with it," Chun Ping'an confessed softly. Aoyang roared with laughter and said, "How miserly of you." Trailing at the back of the group, Zhuhou walked with the horse and created some distance between himself and Li Huai and Lin Shui before whispering to his daughter, "You definitely have to take care of that purple chi guide. If everything works out, it can help you cultivate up to the 5th tier. If you then use the Hero's Gall pill at that time, you can assuredly advance to the 6th tier." The young girl was astounded and she asked, "If I use the pill, then what about you, father?" "Your father is still young," Zhuhou replied with a chuckle. "Now that I've rediscovered my spirits, perhaps I'll be able to advance to the next tier by myself. If I take another step after that, I'll be able to witness the scenery of the lofty 7th tier. Your father dares to dream about this now." A smile finally replaced the young girl's dispirited expression and she teased, "Still young? Father, then why don't you find yourself a young wife when we arrive at Red Candle Town? Don't worry, I won't stop you." An awkward expression appeared on Zhuhi's face, and he shot a glare at his daughter and scolded, "What utter nonsense!" Zhu Lu pondered for a moment before suggesting, "Father, I think you should keep that pill for yourself. I'm only at the peak stage of the 2nd tier right now, so I'm still ages away from reaching the 5th tier." Zhuhi laughed heartily and replied, "All right, then I'll keep it for the moment. I'll just treat it as your dowry for the future." As if thinking of someone, Zhu Lu's face immediately flushed bright red. Zhuhi was in a terrific mood, and he remarked with confidence and pride, "When we arrive at the Greatly Empire's capital in the future, let's see which noble gentleman has the fortune of marrying my daughter." Zhu Lu stomped her feet in embarrassment and exclaimed, "Father!" Zhuhi hurriedly waved his hands and said, all right, I won't say any more." Walking along the post road that was illuminated by the soft glow of dusk, Aoyang continued to stand on tippy toes and rub his hands together as he looked at the fuzzy outline of Red Candle Town in the distance. It was as if he were gazing at a beautiful woman who was lying down drunk in a tavern. "Chun Ping'an, let's agree on something first. You need to lend me a gold ingot," he hurriedly said. Chun Ping'an nodded in agreement. However, he asked in slight confusion, "Aoyang, you also suffer from a lack of money?" Aoyang grinned and replied, "You don't understand this, huh? When traveling around the world, those who lend money are suckers while those who borrow money are the bosses. During our journey, I've been belittled and frowned upon by the bratty children such as Li Huai and Zhu Lu. So, I definitely have to experience the thrilling sensation of being a boss to compensate myself." "Then I'll give you a gold ingot for free," Chun Ping'an said in exasperation. "Not lend to you but give to you for free." Aoyang slapped him on the shoulder and laughed. "Deal! A gold ingot for free." Aoyang gazed ahead and clenched his hand into a fist, saying, "To receive a gold ingot from someone as miserly as yourself for free. Sure enough, I'm a fierce and impressive person." Chun Ping'an didn't regret his decision upon hearing this. Instead, he quietly gazed at the town that they were drawing closer and closer to. The familiar smell and sound of a bustling town swept over, replacing the smell of lush mountains and the sound of flowing rivers. Chun Ping'an turned around and said to Li Baoping, "When we arrive in town, let's see if we can find you some Donghua after buying all the food and necessities we need for the trip." Li Baoping skipped forward in delight, and she lightly bounced her small green bookcase up and down as she exclaimed, "Junior uncle, let's buy 2 small skewers of Donghua. The smaller ones taste better." Red Candle Town was surrounded by a tall wall, and Chen Ping'an and the others needed to enter the town from the northern gate. However, they quickly came across trouble, with the armored soldiers at the gate telling them that they needed to produce identification and visiting documents if they wanted to enter. Chen Ping'an was stupefied upon hearing this. He had absolutely no idea what identification and visiting documents were. Aoyang had already received a gold ingot from Chen Ping'an a while ago, and he was all smiles as he retrieved a crinkled document from his clothes. After passing inspection, Aoyang abandoned even the white donkey as he swaggered into town by himself. When he arrived at the town gate, he didn't forget to wave goodbye to his flabbergasted companions. This caused Li Huai to let loose a torrent of abuse, saying that he would slaughter the white donkey. Aoyang laughed loudly as he walked into town. Zhuhou was at a complete loss. Before leaving the small town, the clan patriarch hadn't discussed these matters with him. In fact, Zhuhou knew absolutely nothing about the outside world. In this sense, he was no better than Chen Ping'an. As for hiking through the wilderness and setting up camps, he was even more inferior than the impoverished young boy. A thought suddenly occurred to Zhuhou, and he remembered that money was sometimes the best way to convince others. This was most likely the same in all places. With this in mind, he secretly offered some loose silver to a soldier guarding the gate. To his surprise, however, the young and sturdy soldier immediately pointed his spear at his chest before scolding him in anger. Even the normally good-tempered Zhuhou couldn't help but feel slightly angry. He was a 5th-tier martial artist, so if he joined the army, it was entirely possible for him to become a middle-ranking general. However, just as Zhuhou was about to start arguing with the soldier, Zhu Lu lightly tugged his arm and quietly reminded him, "Father, the army of the Great Li Empire has extremely clear-cut military laws. Moreover, these rules are peculiar in the sense that the punishments are either extremely light or extremely severe. So, it's not a good idea to get into an argument with these soldiers. Otherwise, commoners like us will definitely come out worse for wear." Zhuhou frowned before humping coldly, and eventually deciding not to argue with the soldiers. Zhu Lu comforted him in a soft voice, saying, "Father, let's ask the clan patriarch to find you an official position in the future. With this status in your cultivation base, I'm sure that you'll be able to make a name for yourself in no time. When that day comes, will you still have to swallow your anger like this?" Zhuhou nodded in understanding as he strode away. He then glanced back at the soldiers and sneered. So the saying really is true. The Lord of the Underworld is easy to meet, but his subordinates and underlings are extremely difficult to deal with. Everyone instinctively turned to Chen Ping'an. Chen Ping'an pondered for a moment before saying slowly, "If push comes to shove, we can only choose to detour around Red Candle Town and camp outside tonight. We can also hire some people to buy the necessary food and goods for us. However, the biggest problem is the fact that we can't access the dock inside the town. This will force us to change our original plans. Instead of traveling north down Embroidered Flower River for 100 kilometers, we'll instead have to walk to our destination on foot. This will be far more tiring than taking a boat, and we'll also have to cover more distance." Right at this moment, a middle-aged man in cyan official garb briskly walked out from the town gate and carefully looked Chen Ping'an and the others up and down. In the end, he looked at Zhuhou and clasped his hands in greeting before asking, "I'm Cheng Sheng, the current relay station deputy at Red Candle Town's Pillow Relay Station. Dare I ask, are you Mr. Zhuhou from Dragon Spring County?" Zhuhou remained silent, and there was a cautious expression on his face. The self-proclaimed relay station deputy chuckled heartily and explained, "Your clan leader wrote a letter and directly mailed it to our county magistrate. He roughly outlined your plans and itinerary, and he asked our county magistrate to be a good host and help you to the best of his abilities. Apart from that, other letters from your family and friends have also arrived at the Pillow Relay Station. I especially organized a place for your group to stay 10 days ago, and I can only guarantee that it's relatively clean and tidy. However, I don't dare to say that it's a luxurious place to live. Please forgive me for this, and please don't complain to the county magistrate about this. Otherwise, if the Lord becomes unhappy, I'm afraid I'll be out of work tomorrow." The relay station deputy suddenly remembered something and he added, If Mr. Zhu doesn't believe me, I can call someone over from the relay resting station right away. This person is from Dragon Spring County's Fortune Street, and he even said that he's worked for the kiln supervision official before. In fact, one of the letters from the capital was personally brought over by him, and he said that he needs to personally hand it over to a young master called Lin Shuyi. Lin Shuyi walked forward with the proud expression of a wealthy noble descendant, and he asked, "I'm Lin Shuyi from Dragon Spring County. Dare I ask, relay station deputy, what's that person's name?" The maidservant Zhu Lu was slightly dazed. At this moment, Lin Shuyi appeared completely different from the quiet and aloof young boy in her impressions. Li Baoping and Li Huai exchanged a quick glance before softly nodding to themselves. There was no hesitation in the relay station deputy's voice as he replied, "If I remember correctly, his name should be Tang Shu too. He's around 40 years old, and he's not very adept at the official dialect of the Great Li Empire. He especially likes drinking, but his temper after drinking." Lin Shuyi nodded before casually asking, "Have you been waiting for us at the southern gates for the past few days?" The man smiled and replied, "Even though I want to say yes, I'm truly not shameless enough to do so. Truth be told, Pillow Relay Station is located in the north of Red Candle Town, and not far from here, there's a beacon tower on a mountain peak close to another small town. I have a good relationship with the official there, so I asked him to keep an eye on the nearby relay road for me. Once he saw young Master Lin and Mr. Zhu pass, he would dispatch one of his subordinates to enter the town and notify me." A look of realization spread across Lin Shuyi's face. He didn't say anything else, and he turned around to look at Chen Ping'an. Chen Ping'an nodded at him. Zhu He smiled and thanked the relay station deputy, saying, "Thank you for going to all this trouble for us, Lord Chang." Chang Sheng hurriedly waved his hands and said, "Please don't refer to me as Lord. I'm nothing but a subordinate who's responsible for serving nobles and other esteemed guests. I'm truly not worthy of such a lofty title." "Alright, enough chit-chat for now. I'll notify the garrison soldiers first, and I'm sure that they'll let you into our small town in no time." The position of relay station deputy was subordinate to the Great Li Empire's imperial court, but it couldn't be regarded as an official position of the imperial court. These positions were lowly, and there was a huge gulf between them and the officials in the imperial court. It wasn't long before Chang Sheng led them to the town gate. Even though the soldiers let them pass, the expressions on their faces still remained solemn and unfriendly. Chang Sheng walked out of the shady and cool gate in the town wall first, and he turned to Zhu He and explained in a low voice, "The garrison soldiers are all retired soldiers from the front lines. Their abilities are only so, but they're truly stubborn and inflexible people. Sometimes, even the county magistrate is unable to deal with them. Mr. Zhu, please don't take offense at their actions." Even though Zhu He wasn't a well-traveled person, he at the very least understood the notion of not engaging in deep conversations with unfamiliar people. Thus he didn't offer a reply. They walked past a chilly shop where young and strong men continued to walk in and out. From time to time, a flash of white would also light up inside the shop. Li Huai's eyes were drawn to this shop, so much so that he refused to budge another step. Zhu He couldn't help but glance over as well. However, he quickly lost interest. "This is a weapon shop that specializes in swords and sabers," Chang Sheng explained. "In terms of other weapons, they do occasionally sell some as well. Doesn't the government care? Are they not afraid of the commoners wielding weapons and brawling?" Lin Shuyi asked in curiosity. The relay station deputy smiled and replied, "The government doesn't care too much about these things. However, if conflicts really do occur, the government will treat it with utmost seriousness. If there aren't enough officials and soldiers, then the county magistrate will mobilize all the sects in his jurisdiction to help." Martial arts were extremely mainstream in the Great Li Empire, and there were numerous adventurers who traveled around with their swords or sabers. There were also overconfident city scoundrels, as there were noble descendants who fought for righteous causes. Even though the imperial court prohibited all sales of arms, they were largely lax in the application of this law when it came to the sales of lower quality blades. At the end of the day, this was all dependent on the attitude of the local officials. If the officials were scholarly people, they would most likely apply this law in a strict and inflexible manner. If they were martial artists who had been on the front lines, however, they would often turn a blind eye to the sales of arms. Of course, the trade of powerful bows, high-quality armor, and so on was all strictly prohibited in all places. Red Candle Town had everything that one could wish for: beacon towers, relay stations, markets, taverns, brothels, theaters, and so on. This was a bustling town whose streets were filled with people. Compared to the small town that Chongping and the others were from, Red Candle Town was far more lively and boisterous. There were all kinds of stands and shops on the streets, and the sounds of hollering and haggling rose and fell. They chatted as they walked, and after around 15 minutes, they arrived at Pillow Relay Station. Workers from the relay station quickly came over to take the white donkey and horse away for them. Sure enough, Changsheng had organized some rooms for them to stay in, with both good quality rooms and medium quality rooms. However, he hadn't decided how to split the rooms for them, and he had instead given the 5 rooms to Zhuhou to let them decide among themselves. Under Chongping's arrangement, Li Baoping would share a good quality room with Zhu Lu, while Zhuhou would stay in a good quality room by himself. As for himself, Li Huai and Lin Shuyi, they would each stay in a medium quality room by themselves. If Aoyang decided to return, he could choose any one of their rooms to stay in. Of course, with his temperament, he would definitely ask if he could stay in the same room as Zhu Lu. At that time, Zhu Lu would most likely roll her eyes at him. Twilight fell, and everyone gathered in Zhuhi's spacious good quality room after putting their luggage away. Changsheng quickly delivered a stack of letters to them, and he smiled and took his leave after doing this. He said that they could call for him whenever they needed. He also told them that Red Candle Town's night market was relatively renowned in the northern regions of the Great Li Empire. If they had the opportunity, it was definitely worth taking a look. There was 1 letter for Lin Shuyi, and there were 3 letters for Li Baoping, the most out of all of them. Surprisingly, even Chongping had a letter. However, Li Huai was left empty-handed. In the end, he walked up to Zhu Lu, who was in a similar situation, and chuckled. Thankfully, we're not alone. Zhu Lu pretended not to hear him, and she walked to the window to gaze outside. Pillow Relay Station wasn't large, but there were many winding roads that led deep inside, surprisingly making it feel like the garden of a wealthy clan that was deep and refined. Looking out from the window, she could see a small lake that appeared as if it were only as large as a palm. This was a lake that housed numerous fat koi that were both red and yellow in color. Lin Shuyi's letter was only a single sheet of paper with few words, and the young boy took a deep breath before placing the letter back inside its envelope. He wore a dark expression as he left the room, with his grip on the letter extremely tight. Apart from the 30-odd characters that were scribbled and perfunctory, there was also a banknote worth 300 taels of silver in the envelope. This was the largest banknote one could obtain in the Great Li Empire. The young boy strode back to his room before lightly closing the door and placing the envelope on the table. He had an angry expression, and his chest rose and fell in an irregular manner. Chongping picked a quiet place to sit down. Li Baoping ran over, and it looked like she wanted to say something to him but didn't know where to start. Chongping smiled and said, "I'll definitely ask you if there are any characters that I don't recognize." Only after hearing this did Li Baoping return to the table. She started to open her letters, which had been sent by her father, her eldest brother, and her second brother. Li Baoping opened her letters one after another. Her father's letter asked her how she was doing, and as usual, he didn't appear strict in the least. Instead, he was telling her to take care among other trivial matters. For example, the weather was getting cold now, so she needed to remember to wear more clothes. While she was still traveling around, she also didn't need to be afraid of spending too much money. Every time she arrived at a relay station, she definitely needed to write letters back to her parents as well. Her father had written endlessly about these matters, and the 5 or 6 sheets of paper were filled up just like that. Li Baoping sighed and looked up at Zhuhi, who was sitting opposite her and sipping tea. "When will father and mother stop treating me like a little child?" she asked gloomily. Zhuhi could barely hide his amusement. Drink tea, drink tea." Li Baoping started to read the second letter. This was from her eldest brother. He wrote that he was studying scriptures and classical works at home now, and he was preparing to attend the imperial examination next year. The contents of the letter were simple and concise, and his handwriting was also legible and neat. It was as if these characters were virtuous people sitting in an upright manner, with each stroke exuding a sense of care and caution. His letter was also filled with the profound teachings of sages, and he told her not to be impolite to Zhuhou and Zhulu. She shouldn't view them as mere servants. He also said that she should listen to Ping'an more often, and that she should learn how to be more resilient and hardworking. That way she wouldn't be a burden to others. Only at the end of the letter did this rule-abiding older brother tell her that he had already become skilled at raising the crab that she had caught from the creek and brought home. She could be at ease. Li Baoping waved the letter in the air and complained to Zhuhou. Big brother cares about me the least. Zhuhou suppressed his laughter. Young mistress, enough with the acting. Who in the Li clan doesn't know that your eldest brother cares about you the most? This was a bookworm that would give even the patriarch a headache when he started to talk about all the profound principles in reasoning. In fact, the first time he had drunk alcohol was when his little sister had secretly swapped his tea for spring peach blossom wine that their clan had brewed. He was so furious that he almost had a mental breakdown, and even his parents were afraid and didn't dare to calm him down. They only dared to follow after him as he stormed off to look for his little sister, afraid that their stubborn son would dish out physical punishment to little Baoping. However, when he arrived at the courtyard, he had seen the little girl standing there with her hands on her hips and with an expression of resignation. He couldn't bring himself to scold her, and this had left him feeling even more angry. In the end, he had turned around and left, and he had simmered with anger for several days. That year, he decided to bury a jar of spring peach blossom wine in his courtyard. When Li Baoping asked about it, he said that it was wine for when he married her out. The little girl had been terrified, so much so that she had snuck out from home and wandered around Dragon Whisker Creek for an entire day. In fact, she had almost run into the mountains to hide. The patriarch of the Li clan was enraged when he learned about Li Baoping's disappearance, and he ordered everyone to spread out to look for the foolish little girl. In the end, it was her eldest brother who had righted his wrong and found her in a small shrine on the opposite side of the creek. The poor little girl had been sleeping on a long wooden bench. After finding her, he had carried her home. Li Baoping suddenly smiled and said, "However, I still like Big Brother the most." The final letter was a thick stack of paper from her second brother. He described his experiences in the capital, and these were all stories about the peculiar things that he had personally witnessed or heard. His manner of writing was elegant, and it was clear that he had put a lot of work into this area. It was as if he were a skilled poet. In the Li clan, this second young master was more popular than his older brother. He was handsome and graceful, and his manner of speech was also gentle and refined. He liked to read books on the art of war, and he had liked to simulate battle with the servants from a very young age. Compared to his stubborn and inflexible older brother, people in the residence preferred to interact with this open and cheerful second young master. When festivals came along, he would also toss a hefty pouch of coins to everyone who he came across. If they offered auspicious words that he enjoyed, he would even reward them with an extra pouch of coins. Li Baoping read through the letter extremely quickly, and when she read up to the second last sheet of paper, she looked up at Zhulu and said, "Second brother mentioned you. Regarding the beacon towers that you two discussed before, he said that he personally witnessed the beacon towers' lighting signals to notify the capital that everything was fine when camping on a mountain peak one night. Looking at it from afar, he said it was as if he were looking at a majestic dragon of flames." Zhulu hurriedly walked over to the table and asked, "Young mistress, did he say anything else?" Li Baoping directly handed the stack of paper to Zhulu. Her second brother had only written about the peculiar things that he had witnessed, so there wasn't any need for her to hide these from others. Zhulu accepted the letter and asked, "Can I bring it back with me to read slowly?" "As long as you don't lose it," Li Baoping replied with a nod. Zhulu left with a delighted smile. The relay station deputy knocked on the door and entered, carrying a plate of fresh fruit and seeds in his hands. A man wearing a bamboo hat walked in after him. Li Huai was infuriated, and he immediately ran over and tried to push this heartless bastard out of the room. Aoyang sat down on a chair next to the table as he pushed and shoved with Li Huai, and he said with a playful smile, "What's going on, Zhulu? Why do you have such a cheerful and charming expression? You look even more beautiful than normal." Zhuhou had a dark expression and didn't say anything. Lin Shui returned and sat down close to Ping'an. Aoyang tossed his small silver gourd to him, and the young boy caught it and took off the cap before taking a swig. Young turned to Changsheng and asked, "Does Red Candle Town have an inlet called the Fu Inlet? And it isn't too far away from the dock." "Indeed," Changsheng nodded and said. However, there was a strange expression on his face. Young clucked his tongue in wonder and remarked, "That's a money sink, I tell you, a money sink." There was a crescent-shaped river bend in Red Candle Town, and this was where the exquisite decorated boats that were unique to the town could be found. These boats were only 6 to 9 meters in length, and decorative purple bamboo strips or ordinary green bamboo strips would be hung around the outside of them. In terms of the internal decoration of these decorated boats, this would be decided by the wealth of their owner. Each boat would carry 2 to 3 women, with most of them being beautiful ladies or those who were youthful and charming. These women would be skilled in at least 1 or 2 areas of musical instruments, calligraphy, painting, tea art, or wine art. Apart from a refined seated area to enjoy the scenery, there was also a bedroom on these boats for obvious purposes. These boat hostesses were lowly citizens of the Great Li Empire, and they would remain so for generation after generation. According to the legends, they were refugees from the overthrown Divine Water Nation. The emperor of the Great Li Empire had once issued an imperial decree forbidding them from ever going on shore. They were destined to be like rootless duckweed for generation after generation. Meanwhile, the residents of Red Candle Town also passed down a story that sang the praises of Wei Bo's actions. They lauded this mountain lord of Go Table Mountain for being loyal and upright, and this was because he had secretly protected their ancestors as they had fled from their war-torn homeland. However, this had enraged the emperor of the Great Li Empire, and caused Wei Bo to be demoted from a mountain god to a mountain lord. At the same time, the emperor had also ordered the descendants of several clans to personally smash the statues of this mountain lord, and throw the scraps into the river. Changsheng carefully chose his words and cautiously picked some harmless stories to tell his esteemed guests. Red Candle Town couldn't be regarded as a main hub linking the north and south of the Great Li Empire, but it was indeed a busy dock where numerous ships came and went, bringing specialties from all corners of the empire. This was a town where 3 rivers converged together: rushing Tranquil River, Embroidered Flower River, and Fine Wine River. However, there were only 2 river gods, and each river god had a shrine built on the banks, inside which their golden statues rested. They were both navy commanders of the Great Li Empire who had been killed in that battle on the water. Only rushing Tranquil River didn't have a river god or shrine. A popular goddess shrine had appeared on the riverbank before, and this was a shrine that had worshipped a heroic woman from the small town who had committed suicide in the river to prove her chastity. However, the Great Li Empire had quickly declared this to be an illegal shrine and had it demolished. It lay in ruins now, and only snakes and rats continued to scurry through it. When he heard the legend about the mountain lord of Go Table Mountain, Li Huai couldn't help but sigh and say in soft voice, "Who knew that the big baddie had such a good reputation in Red Candle Town? We all have our burdens to bear, and every family has its hardships to face." Lin Shuyi commented with a nonchalant expression. Chan Ping'an put away the letter delivered to him by Ruan Xiu. In the letter, Ruan Xiu told him that Downtrodden Mountain had successfully gained a newly appointed mountain god, who would help guard the mountain and gather spiritual energy. She also said that Downtrodden Mountain was only inferior to Cloud Drape Mountain, and her father's Lamp Bearer Mountain.